My friends, life has seasons, times of joy and times of sorrow, times of increase and times of struggle. Every believer, no matter how strong their faith, passes through valleys where hope seems dim and strength feels drained. But today, I stand to remind you of a divine truth God has declared, that your season of struggle is ending and a new one is beginning. Every struggle in life carries meaning beyond what our eyes can see or our minds can comprehend. What feels like defeat, delay, or disappointment is often the very process God uses to mold us into who we are meant to become. In the midst of hardship, it is easy to ask, why is this happening to me? But when we look through the eyes of faith, we begin to see that every struggle has a purpose, and no pain is ever wasted in God's hands. Sometimes God allows struggles not to punish us, but to prepare us. He knows what lies ahead long before we do. There are things He desires to build within us: strength, humility, endurance, faith that can only grow through seasons of pressure. Just as gold is refined by fire, our character is purified through the heat of trials. Without those refining moments, we would remain spiritually weak, dependent on our comfort rather than on God. The struggle becomes the tool that shapes us, chiseling away everything that does not belong so that the image of Christ can shine more clearly through us. There are seasons when everything seems to go wrong. Plans fall apart, doors close, relationships break, and prayers appear unanswered. It is in these seasons that we often feel abandoned, questioning if God even hears us. Yet it is precisely during those silent times that He is doing His deepest work within us. Growth rarely happens in the sunlight of ease. It blossoms in the soil of hardship. Just as a seed must first break open underground before it can sprout into life, we too must sometimes be broken before we can rise into what God has destined for us. When we face trials, we are given a choice to give in to despair or to trust that God is still at work. Struggles can make us bitter or better, depending on where we place our focus. Those who fix their eyes on God in the storm discover that pain can become the birthplace of purpose. The very thing that threatened to destroy you can be the thing that defines your calling. Joseph in the Bible was betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, and unjustly imprisoned. Yet every painful step was leading him closer to the place where God would use him to save many lives. What seemed like a series of tragedies was, in truth, divine preparation. Sometimes God allows a struggle to redirect us. We may have become too comfortable in a situation that was never meant to be permanent. The difficulty pushes us out of what is familiar and moves us toward His will. When doors close unexpectedly, it can feel cruel, but in reality it is God's protection. He knows what we cannot see. He knows which opportunities would lead to harm and which paths will. Lead to blessing. If we could see the full picture as He does, we would thank Him not only for what He gives, but also for what He withholds. Struggles also reveal the true condition of our hearts. When everything is easy, it's simple to praise God. But when life turns painful and uncertain, what's inside of us surfaces. Trials expose whether our faith is built on circumstances or on conviction. They show us if we trust God only when He answers quickly, or even when He is silent. God uses these moments to deepen our relationship with Him. He draws us closer, not through comfort, but through dependence. It is often when we have nothing left but God that we finally discover He is all we ever needed. Every struggle carries lessons that cannot be learned in comfort. Patience grows when we have no control. Compassion is birthed when we know what suffering feels like. Wisdom comes when we've made mistakes and learn to lean on God for understanding. Through every painful season, He is shaping our spirit and teaching us to trust His timing. We come out of the fire not as we were, but stronger, wiser, and more anchored in faith. What once seemed unbearable becomes the very testimony that inspires others. Sometimes the purpose of our struggle isn't just about you, it's about those who will one day hear our story. When others see how God carried you through, their faith is strengthened. Your scars become proof of His power. Your endurance becomes an encouragement to those walking through their own valleys. The pain you endured becomes the bridge God uses to reach hearts you never could have touched otherwise. In this way, even your tears serve a greater purpose, sowing seeds of hope in the lives of others. It is also important to remember that struggle keeps us humble. When life is smooth, it is easy to forget the one who sustains us. But when we are pressed beyond our own strength, we are reminded of our need for Him. Struggle strips away pride and self-reliance. It forces us to surrender control and admit that without God we cannot stand. And in that place of humility, His grace flows freely. The Apostle Paul said, "When I am weak, then I am strong," because he discovered that God's power is made perfect in weakness. Our struggles become the stage upon which His strength is revealed. Many times, we do not recognize the purpose of our pain until long after the season has passed. Looking back, we can see how what felt like loss was actually protection, how delays led us to the right timing, and how heartbreak prepared us for deeper love. What once brought tears later brings thanksgiving, because we realize God was writing a story far more beautiful than the one we would have written for ourselves. So when you find yourself in a season of struggle, hold on to faith. Know that God wastes nothing. Every tear you've cried has watered something that will bloom in due time. Every disappointment has paved the way for a divine appointment. Every unanswered prayer has seated you from something unseen. What feels like an ending is often the beginning of something greater. The struggle is not evidence of God's absence. It is proof of His refining presence. God never allows pain without purpose. He never wastes a hardship in the life of a believer. Even when we cannot trace His hand, we can trust His heart. The struggle that seems senseless today will one day make perfect sense when we see the full picture of His plan. Until then, keep walking in faith, for your struggle is not in vain. It is the preparation for the promise that is yet to come. God's timing is one of the greatest mysteries of life. We often live in a world that demands speed, where we expect instant results, quick answers, and immediate change. Yet God does not move according to human clocks. He moves according to divine purpose. His timing is not meant to frustrate us, but to transform us. What may seem like delay to us is never delay to Him. It is preparation. God's timing brings transformation, both in our circumstances and within our hearts. Many times we pray for things to happen quickly. We want the door to open now, the healing to come now, the blessing to arrive without waiting. But God's timing operates on a different rhythm. He sees the beginning and the end all at once. He knows what we are ready for and what we are not. If He were to give us what we ask for before we are prepared to handle it, that very blessing could become a burden. So He waits not because He is withholding good from us, but because He is forming something good within us. Waiting is not wasted when God is in it. Every delay in His plan has a divine reason. While we are waiting for something external to change, God is working internally to transform our hearts, our attitudes, and our faith. He uses time as a tool to shape us. Just as clay must be molded and refined before it can take its final form, we too must go through seasons of molding before we can carry the weight of His promises. The transformation that takes place during the waiting is often more important than the blessing we are waiting for. In the story of Abraham and Sarah, God promised them a son, but years passed with no sign of fulfillment. They grew old, and from a human perspective it seemed impossible. Yet, when the time was right, when every human possibility had faded, God performed the miracle. His timing revealed His power. If Isaac had been born earlier, the story might not have carried the same testimony of faith. Sometimes God waits until the situation seems completely hopeless, so that when He moves, there will be no doubt that it was His hand at work. His timing turns impossibility into opportunity for His glory. When we rush ahead of God, we often create pain that could have been avoided. We see this when Abraham and Sarah tried to fulfill God's promise their own way through Hagar. Their impatience led to conflict and heartache. God's plan was still fulfilled, but the unnecessary struggle showed the cost of moving outside His timing. When we take matters into our own hands, we may get what we want, but we will miss the peace that comes with waiting on Him. God's timing is not only about what we receive, but about who we become while we wait. Every season of waiting has a purpose. When Joseph was thrown into a pit by his brothers, sold into slavery, and imprisoned for years, it seemed as though his dreams were forgotten. But God's timing was working behind the scenes. Every setback was a setup for what was coming. When the right moment arrived, Joseph was elevated from the prison to the palace in a single day. The delay was not denial, it was divine development. The man who emerged from prison was wiser, humbler, and ready to lead with integrity. The transformation that took place in those hidden years made him capable of carrying the responsibility that came later. God's timing also tests our faith. It reveals whether we truly trust Him or merely trust His blessings. Waiting strips away our illusion of control and teaches us to rely completely on His wisdom. It's easy to believe when everything happens on our schedule, but genuine faith is proven when we can still say, "Lord, I trust you," even when nothing seems to be moving. The waiting room of life becomes the classroom where we learn obedience, surrender, and endurance. God is not only changing our circumstances, He is changing us. Transformation through divine timing often involves pruning. God removes certain things or people from our lives not to hurt us, but to prepare us. He knows what cannot go with us into the next season. Just as a gardener prunes a plant so that it can bear more fruit, God cuts away what hinders our growth. It may feel painful when we lose something we wanted to keep, but later we see that He was making room for something greater. His timing is never meant to deprive us, it is meant to position us. Even Jesus' ministry reflected the perfection of God's timing. When His mother urged Him to perform His first miracle at the wedding in Cana, He said, "My time has not yet come." Though He could have acted, He waited for the precise moment ordained by the Father. Throughout His life, every miracle, every word, every step to the cross was guided by divine timing. Not one event was premature or delayed. When the appointed hour came, He fulfilled His purpose completely. God's timing is always perfect, even when it is beyond our understanding. Sometimes we do not recognize the transformation that is happening while we wait. We become impatient, thinking God has forgotten us, but one day, letting go of the past is one of the hardest yet most necessary steps in walking into the new season God has prepared. Many people live trapped in yesterday, holding on to pain, regrets, and memories that keep them from experiencing the fullness of what lies ahead. But God cannot fill hands that are already holding on to old things to receive what He has for us. We must be willing to release what is behind. The past may have shaped us, but it is not meant to define us. God is always calling us forward, not backward, and His blessings flow to those who make room for the new by releasing what no longer serves His purpose. Every experience, good or bad, leaves an imprint on our hearts. Sometimes those imprints become chains. The words that wounded us, the dreams that didn't work out, the people who left, or the mistakes we made can weigh on us like anchors. We replay moments in our minds wondering how things could have been different, and in doing so we remain emotionally stuck. But God says, "Forget the former things, do not dwell on the past. Behold, I am doing a new thing." This is not a call to ignore what has happened. It is an invitation to stop allowing the past to hold power over the present. When we cling to what is gone, we close the door to what God wants to do next. Releasing the past is not easy because it often feels like letting go of a part of ourselves. The pain may have been real, the betrayal deep, and the loss unforgettable. Yet carrying it forward keeps us bound to the moment of hurt. Healing begins when we decide to surrender the past to God and trust Him with our future. When we forgive those who wronged us, when we let go of guilt for the things we cannot change, and when we stop reliving our mistakes, we make space for God to bring renewal. He cannot pour fresh water into a vessel already filled with bitterness or regret. The moment we empty ourselves of the old, He begins to fill us with peace, strength, and new beginnings. Sometimes we cling to the past out of fear that the future won't be any better. We become comfortable with familiar pain, convincing ourselves it's safer to stay where we are than to risk stepping into the unknown. But faith demands movement. God never calls us to remain in what is dead or stagnant. When He brought the Israelites out of Egypt, They long for the familiarity of their old life, even though it was slavery. Yet God was leading them to a promised land flowing with abundance. In the same way, we must not allow the comfort of the familiar to rob us of the destiny God has designed. Releasing the past requires courage, but on the other side of that release lies freedom. There are moments when God Himself closes doors, not to punish us, but to protect us. A relationship ends, a job opportunity disappears, or a dream collapses, and we are left wondering why. But in time, we often realize that what we lost was not meant to go with us into the next chapter. God knows what will hinder our growth, even when we don't. Holding on to what He has removed only delays our progress. Sometimes what we call loss is actually divine pruning. A gardener cuts away dead branches not to harm the plant, but to help it bear more fruit. Likewise, God removes certain people, situations, or attachments to make room for better ones. Letting go also means releasing the image of who we used to be. Many believers struggle because they cannot forgive themselves. They live haunted by past failures or sins that God has already forgiven. But when Jesus redeems, He restores completely. To dwell in guilt after forgiveness is to live as though His grace is not enough. God wants you to move forward, not as a person defined by past mistakes, but as one transformed by mercy. When you accept His forgiveness, you give yourself permission to start again. The moment you stop rehearsing old wounds and begin to speak faith over your life, you align yourself with God's vision for your future. Releasing the past is not a one-time event, but a daily decision. Every day we must choose to let go of what drags us backward and focus on the promise ahead. The enemy will always try to remind you of what went wrong. But God reminds you of what's possible. He says, "Behold, I make all things new." That includes your heart, your dreams, your relationships, and your purpose. You cannot heal by constantly reopening old wounds. Healing happens when you trust that God can bring something beautiful even out of what once broke you. Sometimes we must even release our expectations of how life should have been. We all have pictures in our minds of how our journeys were supposed to unfold. When reality looks different, disappointment can settle in. But God's plans are always higher than ours. He sees the whole picture, while we see only fragments. When you surrender your timeline and your understanding to Him, you position yourself to receive His perfect will. What you thought was a setback may turn out to be a setup for something greater than you imagined. To receive the new, we must also cultivate a heart of gratitude. Gratitude turns what we have into enough and opens the door for more. Instead of focusing on what we lost, we can thank God for the lessons learned and the strength gained. Every season we've endured has taught us something valuable. Gratitude transforms our perspective and helps us see that even painful endings are often disguised beginnings. When God is ready to do a new thing, He will require you to travel light. You cannot carry yesterday's burdens into tomorrow's blessings. Release the resentment, the doubts, the disappointments, and the fears. Lay them at the feet of Jesus, trusting that He can handle what you cannot. When your hands are free, you are ready to receive. And what God places in those hands will far exceed what you let go of. There comes a point when you must stop looking back and start moving forward. The past cannot be changed, but it can be redeemed. God specializes in turning broken pieces into something beautiful. The moment you release the past, you release yourself. The chains that once held you lose their power, and you step into the newness of life that God has already prepared. He does not want you living in the shadows of what was. He wants you to walk in the light of what is coming. The new season He is declaring over you is filled with peace, restoration, and fresh purpose, but you will only experience it when you let go of what's behind and open your heart to what's ahead. Faith is the key that unlocks every new season God has prepared for your life. It is the bridge between where you are and where He wants to take you. Without faith, we remain stuck in the familiar, hesitant to move, afraid to believe for more. But when we choose to trust God, even when the path ahead is uncertain, doors begin to open that no human hand could have forced. Faith is not merely believing that God exists, it is believing that His promises are true and that His plans for you are greater than what you can see. Every shift in your life begins with a step of faith, and every new season starts with trust. When God declares a new beginning, He rarely reveals every detail. He gives enough light for the next step, not the entire journey. This is where faith becomes essential. Faith says, even if I cannot see the whole road, I will still move forward because I trust the one who leads me. Abraham understood this when God told him to leave his homeland and go to a place He would show him. There was no map, no certainty, no guarantee of comfortably a promise. Yet Abraham obeyed, and through that act of faith, an entire nation was born. The same principle applies to us today. When we trust God's direction, even in uncertainty, we step into divine purpose. Faith is not passive, it demands action. It requires us to move even when fear whispers that we should stand still. The walls of Jericho did not fall because the Israelites merely believed they would. They fell because they marched in obedience, even when it seemed foolish. Sometimes God will ask you to take steps that do not make sense, to speak words of faith when everything looks hopeless, or to keep sowing when the ground looks barren. But those who dare to act in faith position themselves for miracles. The next season will not open through doubt or hesitation. It opens when you say, Lord, I believe, even if I do not understand. Faith also involves patience. Many people believe for a moment but give up when results don't appear immediately. Yet true faith holds steady through waiting. Between the promise and the fulfillment lies a season of testing. God allows this period to strengthen your trust and refine your heart. When Joseph dreamed of greatness, he did not step into it overnight. He endured betrayal, slavery, and prison before reaching the palace. His faith in God's promise carried him through the pain. Had he lost faith in the waiting, he would have missed the fulfillment. In the same way, the waiting season is not punishment, it is preparation. God uses it to deepen your dependence on Him so that when the door opens, you are ready to walk through it with humility and strength. Faith does not deny reality, but it looks beyond it. It acknowledges the mountain, yet declares that God is greater. It recognizes the storm, but believes that peace is coming. Faith shifts your focus from what's visible to what's eternal. The enemy tries to keep you fixated on circumstances, but faith lifts your eyes to the promises of God. When Peter stepped out of the boat to walk on water, he did something impossible because his eyes were fixed on Jesus. The moment he focused on the wind and waves, he began to sink. In the same way, when our eyes are fixed on the problem, fear grows. When our eyes are fixed on God, faith rises. To enter a new season, faith must be stronger than fear. Fear says, what if it doesn't work? Faith says, even if it doesn't work the way I expect, God will still make it good. Fear keeps you in the old season, clinging to what is safe. Faith pushes you forward, trusting that the God who led you through yesterday will sustain you tomorrow. Every time you choose faith over fear, you step closer to the fulfillment of God's promises. Faith doesn't eliminate challenges, it empowers you to face them with confidence that victory is certain. Faith also changes how we speak. Our words have power, and when we speak in faith, we align our language with God's will. Too often, people delay their breakthroughs by speaking doubt. They say, it'll never overcome this, or maybe it's not meant for me. But faith declares God is able even when circumstances say otherwise. Faith-filled words create an atmosphere for miracles. When we speak life over our situations, we invite heaven's power to move on our behalf. The door to your next season may be waiting on the words you choose to speak in faith. Another truth about faith is that it often looks small in the beginning. Jesus said that faith the size of a mustard seed can move mountains. You may not feel strong, but even the smallest act of faith is powerful when placed in God's hands. Faith is not about the size of your confidence, it's about the size of your God. When you take one step of obedience, He meets you there and multiplies your strength. The moment you decide to believe, even with trembling hands, heaven begins to move in your favor. Sometimes faith requires you to let go of what once worked. The manna that fed Israel in the wilderness ceased when they entered the promised land because God had something new for them. If they had clung to the old provision, they would have missed the new harvest. Likewise, your next season may require you to leave behind methods, relationships, or patterns that no longer serve your purpose. Faith trusts that what God has ahead is better than what lies behind. Every closed door is simply direction towards something greater. Faith also gives you endurance when the journey grows difficult. It reminds you that God has not forgotten his promise. It whispers, keep going, when the path feels long. Those who walk by faith understand that progress isn't always visible, but it's always happening. Seeds planted in faith grow beneath the surface long before they break through the soil. The same is true for the promises of God in your life. They are growing in unseen places until the appointed time. Ultimately, faith is surrender. It is releasing control and saying, Lord, I trust you with the outcome. It is believing that even when you cannot trace his hand, you can trust his heart. Faith doesn't always change your situation instantly, but it changes your outlook, your courage, your peace. It transforms your heart so that when the door finally opens, you walk through it ready, mature, and grateful. Every new season God brings begins with a moment of faith. When you believe, you align yourself with divine timing. When you act, you activate divine movement. And when you wait in faith, you welcome divine fulfillment. The next season of your life is not unlocked by striving, fear, or doubt. It opens through faith that says, God, I trust you completely. I will move when you say move. I will wait when you say wait, and I will believe even when I cannot see. That kind of faith opens doors that no man can close and ushers you into the beautiful, abundant future that God has already prepared.